Hello, hi. My name is Michael Crowley, and I've been asked by South Oxhey Library to read some poems, some of my poetry, because I was born in South Oxhey in 1959 and grew up there in the 60s and 70s. Have since moved away, but I write about it. I've written some poetry about it, and indeed, actually, recently found a map from the late 60s of, I suppose, Greater Watford, and I've looked at South Oxhey on paper with a lot of nostalgia. So I wrote a pamphlet called Close to Home, actually, is my first little collection of poems, which was dedicated to the estate, and I'll begin with, I suppose, a description of the estate. It's called Close to Home. Close to Home. It was an overspill, tipped into fields after the war. We played in woods, held chalk white warm eggs, frog spawn and newts, caught in the tracks left by the diggers. We lived in white semis and grew detached between the one-way system and the end of the line. Some of us knew the names of trees, some all the stops to Euston. Nobody knew the fields better than me, the hour and a half of copse and grass, the dell deep enough to abseil down, bright red lines on my palm from the washing line. Coaches came to take our parents to work along asphalt like licorice. We spoke of where our families came from, we made our voices belong. My mother spoke about going home, still, there was always the fields, always a song. I was the first to sing when the weather was high, there were Germans to fight, places to hide. And her, standing at the edge of the path, calling me in before the other boys. There was no adventure for the famous one. We moved on. It became itself after we'd gone. Over the page, I loved playing football and dreamed of playing for Watford. And actually I played a couple of games for Watford boys, but really didn't get anywhere. But anyway, those of you who know the estate know the huge spread of playing fields, and I was there, every weekend and a lot of evenings during the week. And this is a poem about being a child footballer. It's called Game Over. Game Over. On Saturdays at 4 o'clock we headed for the shores of that park, creeping back across riddled pitches to nylon studs applause on changing room floors, where we gave post-match interviews to fathers who walked us home like champions, to a face flannel over my knees, the inspection and reenactment of bruising, the results read out in black and white, and tell her how I played. I ran across October afternoons ahead of the sun's rays, along the precipice of a touchline, and never looked down. We were stars. Tomorrow waited like a substitute, with something to prove. One more, I think, about the estate. This is called A Single to South Oxhey. Those of you that don't know it, which is probably a lot of people, we have our own railway station, or did, it was never called South Oxhey. It was always called, and it's called Carpenter's Park, and which, I don't know, maybe we had a chip on our shoulder, but there was a thing. Whenever we were getting on or buying a ticket at Watford Junction, we would say, I want a single to South Oxhey, just to kind of make the point. And the poem is called A Single to South Oxhey. Other places began under the tracks over the border through a tunnel that led to the other side. Over there they dressed up for work, had bigger windows, cleaner tongues, porches and mortgages. Their children waited to be asked, stayed indoors on their side. They didn't lick their plates with mother's pride, never tried dog biscuits, didn't fight like fires on the dump, do a penny for a guy. They made us ashamed, and they paid for it. At school we all made a model of our station, knew it as well as the garden and the larder. We belonged on a platform for one direction or another, a stop where only we got off, named after the other side. When people came from elsewhere, Jamaican men in blue suits, aunties from Antrim, an uncle from Mitcham, neighbours stood at their doors, wiping their hands on aprons. I stared back at them until I made it abroad, north of Watford, bringing the view from the sitting room. I'd like to read just a couple of more poems. That one is about the virus, the pandemic, and another is from my First of All collection, which came out a couple of years ago. And I think it's my favourite poem from the collection, really. And although when people have written reviews, they never mentioned it, and I'm always sort of in the corner for it. And one of my favourite, I suppose, panto stories, and I did actually see this at Watford Palace Theatre, is Jack and the Beanstalk. And I think it's a fantastic story, actually. And apparently it is a story that came to Britain via the Vikings, giants, etc. And was kind of sanitised sometime in the Middle Ages. But I always wondered, really, if there was a sequel, what would happen. And so I kind of wrote it. This poem is called Here Lies the Giant. I regret it, taking the money, his death. I have buried the rest of his gold in the pit beside him. His death wasn't quick. The earth rumbled like a drum. A cloud rose when he landed. The forest shook out its birds, swallowed by his cries, heard across the kingdom. People stopped, took silent, lowered their spoons, looked to rafters. The harp under my arm echoed his agony. He lay there breathing, face down, steaming like a dray horse. A newt swam in his blood. His moaning darkened the skies. I walked for 3 days, came back in the rain. He was cold. I closed his eyes, his lashes a brush on my fingers. All night I dug the hole. My mother disgusts me. She pirouettes in her new dress, her necklace, her harlot shoes. And look who's back. Eggs in his pocket, arms around her waist, does not make him my father. There is another land, close to the sun. The voyage is a climb. You must hold the mast tightly through oceans of sky. There is a house like this one, a widow who saved my bones. She waits in the kitchen, stirring broth alone. Shoots have appeared from where he lies. In my sleep, I hear them push, feel the beanstalk grow. I will sharpen the axe, sit down with my father, one last time before I go. And this last poem is called Incurable, and it's from my forthcoming collection, which is due out next year, and the collection is called The Battle of Hepton Stall. And this, I guess, yes, is some memories from my childhood, which weirdly I connected to the present COVID crisis. It's called Incurable. I must have swallowed it, like the sweet I took from my mother's pocket. Lipstick red, it smiled when I twisted off the wrapper. I coughed so hard she dropped her ashtray, held me by my ankles and shook it out of me. I must have touched something, like the time I helped my father concrete a path. I watched its flawless surface harden by the minute. Carving my name with a wooden spoon, he burned my ear with the back of his hand. I should have done what I was told. I went to railway arches instead of school. Leaning on a shadow, burning a hole in the afternoon, a policeman brought me home. I should stay in here with my symptoms, but I'm leaving for the high street to rub shoulders with window shoppers, because there is something that I need. Well, thank you for listening, and I hope you all have a lovely National Poetry Day. Cheers.